So you don't necessarily need to be a farmer right now to prove to us that you'll have success in the future. It's more about how you're able to deliver on your past successes and kind of broadcast that into the future. So that's where we go about assessing character in our loan applications, is really, what have you been able to accomplish to date, and how is that going to help you in the future?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brennan Tharmaraja. I'm the head project consultant at the Growcer, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with Trish and Craig from Farm Credit Canada, or FCC for short. This session is all about helping you understand the process and requirements to finance your agricultural project. Before we continue, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type your question into the questions tab on the side of your screen. For the first half of the webinar, Trish and Craig will be doing a presentation, and then we'll have an additional 15 minutes for a Q&A period at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded, and the presentation and recording will be sent out later this week to everyone who has registered. So without a further delay, let's get started. So I'll pass the floor over to Craig and Trish here, and we'll get started.
Oh, great. Thanks, Brennan. And hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your, I know you all have busy schedules, to join us for the meeting and to listen to Craig and I talk a little bit about FCC and financing projects. We're going to split this presentation up into essentially two parts. I'll take the first. It talks a little bit more about FCC and who we are. And Craig will get into a little bit more on how we do a loan, and we'll take questions during the presentation. If we can answer them right out of the gate, we will. If not, we can get back to you, but we'll make sure everybody's questions are addressed. So, Brandon, you want to go to the next slide? I'll just let you know when to turn them then. Okay, great. So who is FCC? We're a federal crown corporation. We're sister crowns of BDC and EDC. Some of you probably are more familiar with them, but we've specialized just in agriculture and agri-food, agribusiness and agri-food and agriculture. We report to the Parliament of Canada through the Ministers of Agriculture and Agri-food. We've been around for a long, long time. 1959 we started, downtown Toronto, I believe. We now have 100 offices right across Canada, and more than 25 years of consecutive growth. Next slide, please. Our mandate is to serve an industry that feeds the world, essentially. We're committed to agriculture and food industries, from those who grow and produce the food to food processors, entrepreneurs, and logistics providers. And we'll see some really good diagrams of all that we've finance that we support, so you get a better picture of that. So we play the long game. We're in it for the long term. We support you in the good times and in the challenging times as well. Our corporate values are that we act with integrity, we be customer focused, and we partner together to give back to communities. Next slide, please. And why work with FCC? Well, we provide access to both financing and ag knowledge. We're invested in agriculture. That's all we do. Ag is our core business, but we are also supporting the ecosystem before and after the farm gate. And we'll be able to see that on a diagram as well a little later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Who does FCC finance? So historically, FCC has limited itself in supporting Indigenous agriculture and food entrepreneurs. We've recently addressed this with our Indigenous relations strategy. We've hired a director, Sean Sunnis. He may even be on the call today. All of our employees have taken Indigenous awareness training, and we've had a change in our definition of agriculture, our eligibility policies, and credit directives. So hopefully we have everything covered off. We're young at this, but we are here to support. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on Indigenous specific. So we'll lend to individual ag production, So an individual applicant, whether they are a startup or existing, on a reserve, off a reserve, or a combination. And we typically get requests for ag production crop inputs, equipment, or other personal property financing. Could be a herd of cattle that somebody wants to purchase as well. We'll finance First Nations or a band, and that would be an Indian band under the Indian Act, governed by its chief and councillors. Again, existing or startup, farms or operates an agribusiness or agri-food business on a reserve, off the reserve, or in combination. And typically requests the same as above: ag production, crop input, equipment, quota, project, and real property financing via leasehold. And then we also are financing or supporting economic development corporations. So it's a company created by a First Nation to operate quasi-independently from the First Nation or band. Usually different corporations are established for different areas of business activities. And again, we do startup, we do existing. The applicant would farm or operate an agribusiness or agri-food business on a reserve, off the reserve, or in combination. And typical requests are for ag production crop inputs, equipment, quota, project, and real property financing via leasehold or corporate and commercial financing. So hopefully we've covered off the majority of requests on that page. Next slide, please. So what do we look at when we're assessing risk? We look at the 3 C's, if you've heard about that before: character, capacity, and commitment. Character, it's all about you. Who are we lending to? The capacity is, it's the ability to pay back the loan. So you want to be able to meet all your expenses, put a little bit back into your pocket for all the hard work, as well as repay our loan, whether it be principal and interest or interest. We have all kinds of products that would help. Eligible activities, your traditional grains, oil seeds, and pulse crops, meat, vegetables, fruit, farm fish, and peat moss, and any agribusiness activity that goes along with that. We've also opened up our eligibility to include, and that box is right over the words. Look at that. Okay, there we go. From wild rice, wild mushrooms, pine tree sap, wild berries, fireweed, various herbs and spices, and freshwater wild fish. Next slide, please. So here's the a little bit more in picture. I always think a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is who does FCC finance as it relates to food and logistics. So we've got a whole gamut of them: food processors and manufacturers, oil refining and blending. Now that's all related to food, so it wouldn't be your natural gas operations. Frozen food, canning and milling, wineries and distilleries, wholesale distribution, commercial bakeries, ethnic and specialty foods, something else there, packaging, here we go, food and beverage equipment, packaging, abattoir, and meat processing. Next slide, please. And then on the agribusiness side, crop input suppliers and retailers, equipment manufacturers and dealers, feed processors, wholesale storage and distribution, grain handling and logistics. Next slide, please. And here your traditional ag production. Love these pictures. Beef, dairy, poultry, hogs, fruits and vegetables, grains and oil seeds, and greenhouses. So really, truly a full gamut of anything that's attached to food, whether it be crop inputs going in, equipment manufacturing, the actual farm financing, or right out the door in the value add piece. We say we finance farm to fork, essentially. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it over to Chris to get into more of the details.
Well, thanks, Trish. I'll take it from here. Do you mind muting, Trish? Perfect. There we go. Awesome. Well, I'll take you guys through what is more of the working with your FCC team. So everything that is more on the tangible, what we're doing internally when we're processing a loan application, we'll kind of take you from what we're analyzing when we're looking at in this case, your vertical growing, containerized growing, or controlled environment agriculture operation. We're taking what we're looking at, what you guys are going to present to us, and how we're making our decisions internally. I'll get you to go to the next slide, Brenovan. Awesome. So let's get started. we always recommend when you're looking at an application for financing to get that relationship started soon with or sooner rather than later with your lender. So it starts kind of when you're in the process of developing your business plan. It's always encouraged to reach out to us, have a discussion, and that way we can assess what needs are there, what you're going to need to provide us, and how it's going to frame within FCC's risk appetite and lending standards. So it gives everyone a very good understanding of what the criteria is, how we're going to look at your application, and how we can get you financed. And we might also be able to connect you with individuals, whether it be contacts, whether it be resources or other things that might be at your disposal, because as Tris mentioned, agriculture, agri-food, and agribusiness is all we do. So it's a network that we've developed over a long period of time to be able to support not only our existing customers, but people that are interested in getting involved in the space. So as always, we recommend you get that process started early and have that discussion so no one's rushed trying to get something out the door and not aligning with what you're looking for. Awesome. Next slide. Perfect. I'm just going to move this over here. So as part of this process, we always recommend that when you're looking at an application, you're looking at your financial partner. So us at FCC, we're a financial partner for this type of operation, like many other out there. But what we want you to do is kind of take an inventory of each lender, whether it's grant funding, whether it's traditional lines of credit at your charter bank, whether it's anything that's going to support your program, your project. We really want to make sure that those are kind of inventoried by yourself before you're getting into the approval process, so that you know exactly who you're getting involved with and what their requirements are. This allows you to really build a relationship and be able to follow through on your project. Next slide, please. Excellent. So break into some of the information requirements. When you're preparing for your loan application, all of our lending decisions, as Trish mentioned, start with management and character. That's the number one thing we're looking at especially when we're looking at new ventures, which I'm sure for a lot of you, this would be where you would fit in. Or if you're an existing operator, we want to see what you've accomplished in the past. So we're taking an inventory of where you're at and how we're going to get you to that next step. So we'll take in a variety of different information to take a snapshot of your current financial picture. So that might include, and is not limited to, a net worth statement, past income tax returns, government issued ID. We might pull a credit check as part of that process, all in the interest of getting to know you as an entrepreneur and where you're at financially at the moment. The character is the number one thing, and I'll be completely transparent. When we're looking at lending, it's all we look at for startups. It's really the pinnacle of assessing risk and choosing to go forward with this type of project. It's very important to us as lenders. So this information helps us get to know you, and while you're getting to know us. Next slide. So I said management was the number one thing, but there's a few other things that go into there as well. So the other thing we're going to look at when we're processing your loan application is repayment ability. So we're going to take a look at your past results. So everything that's built up until now, those were your tax returns, those were your net worth statement, what you have to bring forward to the project, and look at the future projections, the future income streams, how certain they are, how much due diligence you've done on identifying possible opportunities to market your products. And we're really going to look at your ability to repay the debt that you're going to be taking on as part of this project in the long term. And Trish mentioned we were there for the long term. We really want to make sure that our customers are there as well for the long term. So it's at FCC, we need to be a responsible lender, and we need to make sound credit decisions based on the most likely scenarios. And that's what we're looking at when we look at repayment ability. Your prior credit history is something we need to understand as well. Make sure that you have been keeping up to date on payments and such. And often what we say on at FCC is that, you know, the past often dictates the future. So we, you know, if there's anything that comes up there that's derogatory, what we need to know is, you know, what's the explanation behind that, and really understand your prior credit history. Now, the last item in there is the security. So when we say security, that's the way we collateralize our loans. So we want to know that the asset that we are taking as collateral, that we are financing, is sufficient to cover potential losses in the future. So that's really a piece that that we need to understand. You know, is that something that's resellable? Is that something that that we'll have access to? You know, is it in a leased facility? All those details we need to understand to be able to put a number on what we have as collateral. I always like to position these three items as kind of 3 points of a triangle. Now, when I say 3 points of a triangle, what we're trying to do is create a large and balanced triangle. And if one item is kind of lacking in its strength, what we need to do is compensate with another. So let's say repayment ability is unsure. You know, there's no contracts that have been negotiated. There's been no due diligence done on the marketing side or anything along those lines. Our repayment ability is maybe more unsure than it is in other circumstances. So what we might do is compensate with the security aspect. We might require a larger down payment or a lower credit facility, what we call a credit facility to security ratio, to enable us to provide financing. So that's what I mean by kind of looking at forming a balanced triangle and compensating for some of those aspects that might be weaker. You know, nothing has to be perfect, but we're in the marketplace of risk, and we need to understand those risks that we're taking on. Excellent. Next slide. So the relationship that we build during this process isn't something that ends when we are completed the approval or the financing. So one thing I want to encourage all the individuals here today to note is that once that financing is in place, the relationship isn't over, right? That loan is going to last much longer, and the relationship hopefully will last much longer than that. What we ask of you is often to keep us as a lender updated with any material changes to the business. So whether it be changing strategy, changing the suppliers, changing customers, we need to, you know, understand those in good times and bad so that we might be able to assist you in the proper ways through your entrepreneurial journey. So that's something I always recommend, you know, is to prepare a cash flow budget, and you know, maybe if something changes in that budget, to keep us informed and keep that relationship and lines of communication open so that that things are always on the up and up. Excellent. Next slide. So this is your relationship checklist, and as they mentioned, there's going to be this presentation is going to be shared after our live presentation here today. So you'll have this quick FCC relationship checklist in your files to be able to refer to when you're looking at possible loan consideration. So I wanted to put that in there for everyone today. Next slide. So the credit approval process, what I've walked you guys through to date is, or up till now, is what we're looking at in an application. But while we're looking at that application, there's various different steps that this breaks into. And I wanted to give you guys, in the interest of transparency, what our process looks like internally when we're looking at approving this type of financing. So the steps that I or Trish have to walk through as relationship managers when approving this type of financing. Next slide. So pre-approval, this is the process by which we bring, you know, a file that we have, we just had a conversation on the phone about, and that we're bringing all the way up to a pre-approval, or what we call our alignment. Or a credit alignment. So our first step is to ensure that your business or project is eligible under FCC's mandate. So as Trista explained, we focus on very specific sectors, being agribusiness, agrifood, and agriculture. And those sectors are all we finance. So, you know, no hotels, no shopping malls, no unrelated real estate to agriculture. We don't get involved in all that is outside of our mandate. So when a file comes in, we'll take a look at whether it fits the eligibility at FCC. And this is often a point that kind of garners some questions. So we'll address those at the end. but anything that doesn't fall within that is immediately referred on to, say, another one of our sister Crown organizations or something like that. And once we've determined that it is in fact eligible, we'll collect the information and documentation required. So the way I do it usually is I send out a quick list of information by email in some of our FCC branded documents to collect your information, personal financial information, authorization for a credit check, net worth statement, all that good stuff that we mentioned earlier in order to make a lending decision. Once we've had all that and had a few discussions on what works best for the entrepreneurs, we'll provide usually a discussion paper, or what we'll do is just have that discussion directly with yourselves. So we'll align a document that we can support or that we're working to support, and make sure that that financing that we're presenting fits your needs. So it's not an approval document. It's essentially a validation of our discussions to make sure that we're lining up with what the customer or what the entrepreneur needs. So once we have your okay on that document and that you have essentially signed off on what FCC is putting together for you, we'll develop a credit package. So that package is usually what we'll call internally a loan narrative. We'll build a large working document where we essentially defend and align the credit application. We break down the various risks, the various mitigating factors, and the reasons why we should or should not approve the credit facility. Usually at this point, we're pretty aligned to we should do the credit facility. So we're really focused on that aspect, why this is something that FCC should support and how we go forward. And it's kind of the second part of that discussion paper. Here's what we're presenting. This is why we're presenting it. And this is why we think it's a go for FCC. So once we do that, we'll also have our valuations team. If there's collateral that we're taking, we'll have them take a look at what the security package FCC would be registering it looks like. They'll put a number and make sure that fits within what we had discussed internally, and make sure that there's sufficient collateral to cover our loan in this case. And then we'll package that all together. And we'll send it to the authorizing officer. In some cases, Trish or myself will be those approving officers, so we can handle it ourselves. Or when it requires, for various different factors, a second level of sign off, it'll go to our credit team, and they'll have a go through our credit package and find all the reasons why we should do the credit facility. And if all goes well, we get our final approval and keep going. Next slide, Brenna. So post-approval. So once we get that approval internally, it's not over yet. There's still a few more steps to do. So once we get it, there might be some slight changes that our credit departments or approving officers have approached us with. We'll go back and forth on those and make sure they align with what the customer is requiring. And through this process, our goal is always to keep regular communication to update you on where we're at and what we're working on. But if everything goes well, we'll prepare our documentation and forward it either to a solicitor in the case of real estate transactions, or directly to yourselves if that's not required. And sometimes what this document will provide is the confirmation of your approval, our securities and financing, and a summary of the credit facility as a whole. If we get your sign off, sometimes there's a few conditions to be provided to advance funds. As long as those are met, the money flows out. And FCC continues to manage that credit facility into the future. So I noted another point there, take additional steps on specialized loan products. Those are for specialized transactions, say a construction or an ongoing disbursement loan, something along those lines that we need to maintain long term. So that in a nutshell is what our process looks like internally when we're adjudicating these loans, and the factors that we use to kind of align ourselves to provide the financing. So when it comes to specific lending decisions, what exactly we need, I always encourage everyone to have a discussion with either our customer service center or their local FCC office, as everyone's situation is different. So we need to address specific questions with specific relationship managers. And that's pretty much it. If you move to the next slide, we're pretty much walked through the presentation. So we can, I don't know how you wanted to do it, Brandon, if you wanted to open up directly to questions or what works best.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's great. That was a lot of insightful information here. Now we'll move on to more of the questions. So if you have any questions for Greg and Trish or I, please type it into the questions tab on your screen. So we do have a handful of questions that were already asked by a few participants. So I know in the early presentation, you mentioned that FCC works a lot with Indigenous communities. Outside of Indigenous communities, who do you primarily work with? Is it existing farmers, new farmers, entrepreneurs? Because I think there might have been a bit of confusion in that question earlier.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have actually addressed that right at that slide. We had added that slide in just to make sure that we are capturing everybody. But traditionally, like we hadn't been providing the necessary services, products, and services to the Indigenous communities. So that's why those slides were in there. But for the past 59 years, we've been providing financing to primarily farm finance operations. So that's our backbone. So whether it be crops, growing crops, livestock, greenhouses, vegetables, that kind of thing, or dairy or chickens. And in the past, I'd say 20, 25 years, we've opened up our mandate to also include the value add. So anything to the beginning or the end of that farm finance or farm production piece. So we do the manufacturing, food manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, crop inputs for anybody. So it can be anybody that's a Canadian citizen. That's our only stipulation. If it's a foreign-owned company, as long as they've got a Canadian office and a Canadian registration, we can do business with them as well. My only thought was we don't have anything really that talks specifically around Indigenous lending, so we put that slide in just to help out. Sorry for the confusion.
No, that was perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. So there's a handful of questions around what kind of projects and who's eligible. So you answered all those perfectly. Okay. And there's a couple of questions around, I know Craig talked about this, the mandates of FCC, and he mentioned vertical farming and controlled environment growing. Does container farming fall under those three specific mandates that you mentioned?
Absolutely, absolutely. So container farming is something that FCC has as an eligible activity. So it really falls within what we do. Anything that you can think of that falls within the food or food beverage value chain is eligible with FCC, minus the retail only portions. We don't finance grocery stores or anything like that. But when it comes to containerized agriculture or controlled environment agriculture, it's essentially agriculture using different techniques. So it's nothing new for FCC. We've been financing greenhouses for a long time. This is another iteration of that, and we definitely are supporting that industry as well. So it's 100% eligible.
Yeah, a really good way to look at it is anything that's related to food, we're in.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that as well. There's one more question around here. Does FCC have a specific business plan format that you prefer that the entrepreneurs or folks looking to start up use, or that's available for them to use?
Craig, I don't know if you've, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I don't know if you've seen any templates, but we don't, I have never seen a template that FCC has said, hey, use this template. It's basically, sometimes the customer will go to their accountant to get something drawn up. But we really are looking for like who we're lending to, the manager, shareholder bios, marketing plans, projections. What does the product do? What are you aiming to do with the financing, sources and uses, that kind of stuff. What's the plan essentially? And it can be anywhere from a little bit better than the back of a napkin to something that has been vetted by a third-party expert, depending on the complexity of, we do many loans without business plans. So it's not always necessary, but it just gives us, because we want to set you up today, for success, as well as success within for the next 3 to 5 years as well, and longer. So we want to know what your plan is, and then we devise our financing along with you based on where you want to go, where you want to take the business and yourself. Greg, anything else? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's good. I always say it's we don't have a template because the risk and specificity oh geez, that's a tough word. The specifics of each project are different, right? So we don't require a template, so to speak, but we need to have a complete breakdown of what you're proposing. So your plan, how you're looking to operate, and what various relationships are going to be involved in making this happen, right? So it can vary, you know, current owners often don't have to do a complete business plan, right? Because they have a track record of proven results that we can base our future decisions off of. When we go more into the startup space, where we don't have any historical information to back our decisions, what we'll do is we'll ask for a business plan and a way to validate those projections, those sales targets. You know, often we'll ask for a break-even analysis to really see where the company needs to operate to cover its debt. So, you know, things like that are required, and we'll be, you know, clear when we're looking at the request and its specific risks to what we need. But yeah, the complexity and risk always drives the amount of information we require.
Perfect. And there's another question here. What amount of financial support do you offer startups?
Maybe a little more on that question, Brenovan. Is it specific, like what type of amount, like a lending amount, or is it more support on an advisory level?
Financial, and also the support, the business support.
Okay, well, what we can generally do for startups is as I mentioned during the presentation, is connect them with the proper players in the industry, the proper contacts, being able to help develop a business plan, being able to help develop their business model. We can put them in touch with the proper people because it's a network we operate in. You know, well, it's the only place we operate in or market we operate in. So we're always able to connect them with the right people. FCC doesn't offer formal advisory services similar to what you'd see at a BDC, but we do it in a more informal fashion, accompany our customers to get them to that point of financing. And when it comes to amounts, there's no there's a $5,000 minimum and 150 million maximum. So there's anywhere in between there is kind of the financial support we can bring to our customers. And it's all dependent on each project, right? So there's no cap. A startup can only get X amount of dollars or anything like that. It's more project based that we make those decisions.
Great. And there's a couple of questions around the FCC lending to Canadian companies. You mentioned that before. So it does not have to be a Canadian company, but they need to have offices or a location in Canada. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yes, so we can lend to individuals, sole proprietors, partnerships, corporations, as long as the shareholders are Canadian citizens, as well as if there's a foreign company that has set up an operation in Canada, we can also lend to them as well. We're going to take a look at the whole package. We're going to do eligibility rulings. We're going to see, does it fit within our mandate? Do we want to lend to these people? Are we comfortable? Are we satisfied that the general public would say, hey, okay, good for FCC to be in there and lending money? But yeah, it's mainly our mandate is all around supporting Canadian agriculture. So, and that's what we need to keep in mind. So if we're lending money to, I don't know, Xerox, does that really support Canadian agriculture? No. So we go through those kinds of questions when we're lending to anybody. But anybody, so individuals, sole proprietors, partnerships, corporations, publicly traded companies as well.
Perfect. And there's a question here on how FCC will look at a new farmer with no prior history of farming. I know, Greg, you mentioned character is one of the top sort of mandates you look at. Can you dive into a bit more into that question there?
Absolutely, and that's kind of why we ask for current financial pictures of many of our applicants, right? So we don't necessarily need the person to be a farmer to prove that he can be a farmer in the future. He or she can be a farmer in the future. What we need to ascertain or to understand is really this person's ability to deliver on what they're projecting and to be able to service their debt in the future and to have a successful agribusiness or agri-food or agriculture operation. So what we'll take a look at to a large extent is any other accomplishments that these people have had. You know, sometimes we might ask for a resume to understand what things has this individual been able to accomplish in the past that will help them in the future. And it doesn't need to be specifically agriculture. You know, we have customers that had a background in finance and that got involved in agriculture, or technologies and got involved in agriculture, or engineering, or various different sectors that took that and pivoted those same skills, used them in agriculture and had success. So you don't necessarily need to be a farmer right now to prove to us that you'll have success in the future. It's more about how you're able to deliver on your past successes and kind of broadcast that into the future. So that's where we go about assessing character in our loan applications, is really, you know, what have you been able to accomplish to date, and how is that going to help you in the future?
Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions around what kind of financings terms does FCC provide? I know you provided the total amount that's available for projects, but how do the terms look like, the loan structures and the rates?
Rates, why don't you take that one, Craig? Try it a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So we have maybe a little bit of interest here is the different types of products we have. So depending on what you want to do, and this is where that discussion between the potential customer and us comes along, get an idea of where you want to take the company. So do we need to have some interest-only products in there? We have those. Do we need some sort of a credit line? We have those. Is it a construction project? Are you buying equipment? Is it quota? So we have a whole raft of products, depending on what you want to do, that would fit. The interest terms, we have open interest terms, open variable rates, where you're able to pay off as much as you want, whenever you want, no penalty. And then we have fixed rates available as well, anywhere between 1 and 15 years, you can lock a rate in. Amortizations are again dependent on the life of the asset, essentially. If we're looking at a construction project and it's a commercial construction project, anywhere between 15 and 20 years to amortize it. Equipment, probably 10 years. Livestock, if it's a breeding herd, maybe 5 years. So it depends on the life of the asset. That's how long we'd amortize it. So there's essentially two parts to it. There's the interest part that can be open or fixed, and then there's the amortization part, depends on the life of the asset. Does that help?
That's perfect. No, that answers a lot of the questions here.
Okay.
And there's another question on how do we contact FCC? So is it by province, by region? Who does an entrepreneur reach out to if they're looking to get their project financed?
So it can be through one of quite a few places. So it kind of depends at what stage you are in your project as to who you're going to be reaching out to. If you're looking for more information about what FCC does and kind of some general, just have a general discussion with someone that works at FCC and how we could help with your project, we always recommend you contact, there's a number on our website, our customer service center, to have an initial discussion. And they will actually connect you in most cases with a local office or someone in a local office that is able to assist you. From there, it'll likely end up, to me or Trish or someone else in your local province that will be able to look at the loan application. But if you take a quick look on Google Maps and you're able to find your local FCC office, you can always reach out directly via their phone number, or each office in Canada at FCC has has a number that you can dial to get their general line or a general inbox, and you can definitely reach out through there. If you're farther along in the project and you have, say, your business plan together and you're starting to have those tangible things, you can reach out directly. So, you know, if it's general questions, we always say to our customer service center. If it's more about a specific project and you're getting down the line on developing that project, you know, feel free to reach out to your local office.
Perfect. So if anyone has any more questions, don't hesitate to drop it into the chat on the side here. So I know, Greg, you shared the sort of the checklist in the application process. So what are the most common mistakes you've seen in an application, and how could you avoid those?
I'd say the level of planning, right? When we're looking at these, or the level of planning or level of due diligence that customers are doing on their business plan is often the point where we put most emphasis on, especially with a startup or new entrant into agriculture. We really need to understand, you know, who you're going to be selling to, what's your value proposition, what's going to differentiate you in the marketplace, and maybe if you've had some discussions with a lot of those potential customers where you're going to sell your product. I think those are the things we often need to understand the most, and that we see the least amount of effort. Everyone always says, you know, people, you guys work at the bank, all you want to see is the numbers, which, you know, the numbers is something we need to understand, but what we really need to understand is how you're going to accomplish those financial projections. You know, what contracts are you going to have? What customers are going to be there? Where do you stack up compared to your competition? You know, all those intangible factors that you can make more tangible for us so that we better understand how you're going to be successful in the marketplace. I think that's often a place where it's often forgotten sometimes that we really look at that portion of the financing request.
Perfect.
Trish, anything to add on there?
That was great, Craig. Thanks. Another thing that's really important is the I always like to call it the bios, but when we're getting into the writing up our applications, because we want to support you, we want to be able to believe in what you're doing, and we like to get the bios and the customer experience and knowledge and history and certificates and whatever you have that you can tell us what you've done and all your accomplishments. And that's kind of a cool piece that we can put into our narrative if we need to send it up for further adjudication. It's a great way to get to know the people and to see just what they've done in their life and why they're going to be successful going forward. So the bios piece, don't underestimate how wonderful you are, and let us hear about it.
Perfect. So I know you mentioned the bio, the character, looking at the business outside the numbers. What other qualities are we looking for in a successful application? I know marketing plan is something that could be crucial, but is there anything else that would make an application shine?
You know, one thing that you might consider is what we call the SWOT analysis. You're probably familiar with that, but the strengths of the application or the project, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. If you've covered that off, that kind of gives us a good feeling that you understand what you're doing, and we're able to write a good narrative and support the application as well. It really is all about really knowing what you're doing to be able to sell it to us, and then we need to sell it to our people too in credit. So the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, if you can touch on those, awesome.
With regards to the whole process, so if an entrepreneur has an idea, has done some of the legwork and planning, and then they reach out to FCC, how long would it normally take in order for them to be approved and then sort of finance and get the project underway?
It'll vary quite a bit from project to project and the complexity of each, but I always say a standard when we're taking a look at a business plan and getting to know each other, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks usually is a good timeline. You know, if things are more complex, you know, maybe a month, something like that, but it's generally somewhere in that range.
And we find if the business plan or the application is complex and there's a lot of financing involved, and we need to involve lawyers and their timelines as well, that's where we also have to be mindful of the time it takes outside of what FCC and the customer does. So when we're doing complex construction deals, it's not unheard of to go 8 to 12 weeks, maybe even longer, before we see money go out the door. And it's just because the lawyers need to make sure that everything is covered off on their end. So the easier, the quicker. We can do loans in 2 weeks if we need to. But if it's a construction project or something complex, probably more like a 12-week turnaround by the time you actually have the money in your pocket.
Perfect. And there's a couple of questions also around what sort of types of funding is potentially available for new farmers specifically. Is there any special initiatives to help support their projects for the new farmers that are looking to get their projects financed?
I think there's a few products that FCC has that might fit those new entrants or new farmers, but they're not specific to necessarily those new entrants to agriculture. What we have is an FCC starter loan, and that's for our what I would call very young entrepreneurs that are getting started. So that's 25 and under. There's a loan that's specific to that segment, and it's capped at 50,000, but it's to help get started. And often we can have more flexible credit terms on that smaller loan. So that's for someone looking to make their first purchase or first entry into agriculture as a young individual. And then what we have would be our young entrepreneur or young farmer loans for anyone under the age of 40 that we also offer, capped interest rates, more flexible loan to security requirements, and waiver of certain fees that we usually have to process credit facilities. So those might fit those new entrants to agriculture, just a product of being new to the space, but nothing specific for people that weren't in agriculture before and that are now entering the market.
And then for the folks that don't have an account with FCC, how do they get started? Is there a way to create an account or anything like that, or it's just reaching out to the local office?
Yeah.
Just reaching out. Go ahead, Trish.
No, I'm just gonna say, just reach out to the local office, or when you do make a connection with a relationship manager or a lender, like Craig and I are. We'll have a few know your customer or onboarding documents to complete, and we load all that information into our system, and that's essentially our starting point then.
Perfect. Those are some really helpful answers. So before we move on to some of our final questions, for anyone that's interested in following up with the Growcer to talk about a specific situation, please feel free to reach out to Nick directly. His contact information is provided on the screen right now. You can write down his contact information from the slide and get the conversation started from this webinar. So for us, we do have a couple of questions here that are more centered around, there's a couple of people that are still curious around if FCC provides financing for Canadian producers of all kinds. So I know we covered that early in the webinar. So Trish, if you want to just jump in here and just clarify some of the different projects that FCC's financed over the years.
Oh gosh, yeah, we get very creative when it comes to financing projects. Boy, I should have brought a list of some of the crazy things we've done recently, but like I say, if it's anything to do with agriculture or food or beverage or heck, we even dabble a little bit into cannabis, if you can imagine. Not too many of those deals out there, but they are there. Transportation, warehousing, equipment manufacturing, crop inputs, anything to do with food processing, supporting agriculture either through the input side or the output side, anywhere from field to fork.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So I think that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today, and for all your questions. And a special thank you to Trish and Craig for taking the time today. This was the final session in our Container Farming 101 series. So thank you to those who joined our previous 2 sessions. And if you missed out, we will have them all listed on our website in the webinar section. To learn more about The Growcer in general, you can visit us at thegrowcer.ca or follow us on social media. If you didn't get your question answered today, feel free to connect with us directly. Thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.